Hi, my name is Joe Crimmins from Serve and Protect LLC. We wanted to thank you for choosing us to help you with your crisis training and working with you on active shooter, active threat scenarios to make you and your workplace safer. As you'll see from this video series, a small amount of pre-planning can have a great benefit in making you and your employees and your workspace safer. So we hope you enjoy these videos. An active threat in your workplace requires immediate action. And these action steps are frequently called run, hide, fight. Depending on where you are in the country, they could have other names. Run is simply evacuate. Hide is also called lockdown. And there's subsets of that, hard lockdown and soft lockdown, which we'll get into. And then lastly, fight. Again, you'll hear different terms, but those terms all mean the same thing. And it's run, hide, fight. The purpose of those words is to put in your mind, you must take immediate action, whatever you do. If you decide to evacuate, if you decide to lock down, and you may be in a situation where those won't work for you either, and you're going to have to fight. What fight really means is don't give up. We don't teach people how to fight. We don't tell you how to fight. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is if you've committed to an evacuation and that's led to a bad outcome, you've met the bad guy, or if you're locking down and the bad guy is breaching your door, you're going to have to take it to the next level and transition to something else. And we refer to that as fight. So the bottom line is just don't give up. So run, hide, fight, to break those down, and we'll spend a couple videos talking about some general points on those. Run or evacuate. Always the first option to consider. It would be great to be able to get out of the building, right? It's not always that simple. First best option to consider, evacuating. What if you're on the 5th floor of an office building and you're told, or you get a phone call that there's a shooter in your building, but you don't know what floor and you don't know where they're moving? It's going to be hard to evacuate down 5 flights of stairs if you don't know where the shooter is. So that might be a situation where you have to lock down. Similar situations would be a school teacher with 30 first graders. It's going to be hard for that first grade teacher to lead 30 first graders down a long hallway and out the building. So sometimes it just doesn't work, although it's certainly the first option to consider. In the following video, we're going to talk about more specifics of actually locking down and what a good lockdown looks like. We're talking about the components of run, hide, and fight. On a previous video, we discussed a little bit about evacuation. Let's talk a little bit about a lockdown, and that's only if you can't get out. Lockdown requires a little bit of preparation, a little pre-planning and preparation. What it means is you are locked, you are dark, you are silent, and you are out of sight. Those sound simple, but they do require a little pre-planning, as we'll talk about. What is an effective lockdown? You're in a room with a locked door. You've got to be behind a locked door. And if you don't work in an office space, or your office does not have a door that can be locked, you have to pre-plan and create one and find one in your office. Find one that you can actually get into in an emergency situation. As part of that component, you want the lights off so the bad guy can't see you. You want to be out of sight, and you want to be silent. If the bad guy can't see you and can't find you, your chances are pretty good. You'll see on many of the videos you'll find on the internet, simulated active shooters, you'll see videos of the shooter, the simulation, going to the door, trying the doorknob, they can't get in and they move on. That is pretty realistic. A bad guy is not going to take the time, customarily has not taken the time, to blow their way through an office door in which they don't know anybody's behind the door. They're going to simply move on and find easy targets, because there'll be plenty of them. As long as you're locked, dark, silent, and out of sight, you're going to be pretty good to go. We're going to spend additional time on videos talking about pre-planning for that type of situation. Because again, if your door doesn't lock and you don't have a space on in your office that you can get to quickly and immediately, that's something you have to create, and create it now. Let's continue our conversation about a lockdown and the pre-planning that goes into that to create a successful outcome for you, to have a place to hide. Many offices today don't have locked doors, so that's step number one. If your workspace does not have a locked door, as we mentioned, you're going to have to find one. Now, the part of pre-planning that's so important is, let's say you do find an office door that will lock somewhere in your office, a conference room, something like that. You also need to be able to get into it. So if that door is normally locked, and this could again be any storeroom or a computer room, if that door is normally locked, but that is your safe room, you need to have a key to that well ahead of time. The other thing to point out here too is, if you're in this situation where you need to get behind locked doors, you need the key immediately available to you, and that means not fishing for it in your desk. Again, you're going to be under tremendous stress. There's a bad guy walking through your workspace firing a gun or hurting people in some other way. That key needs to be immediately accessible. That's either on a lanyard around your wrist, hanging nearby by your desk. The point is, if you are looking to get into a locked room in an emergency, you cannot be looking for the key during that emergency. It has to be immediately accessible. I've done office assessments where people say somebody in the office is responsible for the key or has the key to get into that room. That's not going to work. You need the key. And you need to pre-plan and make sure that there's some room that you can get into. If for some reason there's no lock spaces, you have to at least create some boundary or borders between yourself and a bad guy that could increase your chances of the bad guy simply passing you and moving on because they don't see you. Situation of a desk being laid out in an office. If the desk is perpendicular to the door and the bad guy is walking through the hallway and he can plainly see you sitting by your desk, you don't have many options, assuming you couldn't get your door closed. However, if you simply changed your desk and made it parallel to the door where you could be behind your desk and the bad guy would have to walk into your office and look around your desk to see you, you've increased your chances by 50%. Is it possible the bad guy's going to walk into your office and look under your desk? Certainly. Is it equally possible that they're just going to pass by because they looked in your office and didn't see you? Very possibly. That's the goal here. Increase your chances. Let's talk about systems-based training versus behavioral-based training. Systems-based training is physical hardware, security systems, access control, prox cards, cameras. Those are all great. We highly recommend those if you don't have them. They're not enough. Security systems can be bypassed by the bad guy. Behavioral training cannot. What is behavioral training? That's teaching you how to respond efficiently and effectively and immediately to an active threat. The bad guy can't defeat that. Behavioral training, let's talk about or systems-based training. Let's talk about a failure of a systems-based training. Let's say you have a company, you've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in a systems-based, a security-based training, and you have your prox card and your access control panel that requires your employees to swipe in and out. If I'm a bad guy, all I need to do is get a swipe card, and that may simply mean standing out in the parking lot out at dusk or at nighttime, waiting for an employee to come by and knocking them out and grabbing their swipe card. If I have a swipe card, I've bypassed your whole security system. At least it'll allow me to get into that building and accomplish what I want to accomplish. That's the problem. We see situation after situation where bad guys are getting into buildings no matter how robust or strong the security systems are. In fact, many of you in the Midwest are very familiar with a senior citizen who bypassed every level of TSA security systems and boarded an international flight without a ticket. These things can happen. Behavioral training, this is teaching you how to respond. That can never be defeated. And that's why this sort of training is so important. You actually have to do something and participate and know how you'll respond. And the bad guy can never defeat that. Let's talk a little bit about a written plan and the accompanying training, if there is any. We sometimes call this the red binder syndrome, and many of you will be familiar with this. Somebody in the long ago past, or maybe recently, has been tasked with writing a written policy. They did so. What standards they used, who knows? But they did it. They put it in a fancy red binder. It went up on the shelf, and it has never been looked at since. How important is a written plan? It is very important. It is the foundation for your ongoing training. It is one of the few policies that when it's needed, no employees will ever have the chance to read it. And what does that mean? It means you need to know it. And that's why we follow up a written plan with training. So having a written plan is very important. In fact, now there are rulings, administrative rulings and court rulings saying that when looking at negligence, the existence or non-existence of a written policy is going to be a factor in liability for companies for workplace violence. So the written policy is extremely important. What we want to do is we want to take it out of the red binder, get it off the top shelf, and have people actually know it. So this involves training. What we're finding is now many companies have a written plan, but again, your plan is only as good as the last time you practiced it. So I'm willing to bet that many companies out there have never practiced it, and that's assuming they have any sort of a workplace violence plan. So have a written plan. It needs to be short and to the point because employees are not going to be able to read it. They need to know it, and follow up with that written plan with a training component, getting people moving and some sort of a training exercise. Have you ever conducted a full-scale training exercise for your building or your office? Probably not. It's still very rare, even in this day and age. So let's talk about some general topics I can help you with how to conduct a full-scale training exercise. Again, this could be an 8-hour class, but I just want to give you some basic things that we feel are very important and that will get you off on the right foot. Everybody participating needs to be very, very familiar with what's expected of them. Doesn't mean that you're looking for absolute success and that people are going to do the right thing or make the right decision. But what you want them to do is you don't want to set anybody up to fail. So you want to train them up to the point where you're now going to conduct an actual exercise where they have to get up and move and do something, either hide or lock down. And you want them to be successful. But again, it doesn't mean they have to be successful. The drill is where we're going to find out what works and what doesn't work. But your foundation needs to be, everybody needs to have had an opportunity to know what is expected of them. You don't want people complaining after a drill exercise that they didn't know this, they didn't know that. It makes everybody look bad. It looks unprofessional and it looks unskilled. So make sure everybody has that foundational level of knowledge of the plan and what their options are. Now that you have everybody trained up to a certain level, let's actually start the exercise and let's talk about what's involved in that. A training exercise for an active shooter is often called a hard lockdown drill. It can be called an active shooter drill or an active threat drill. We're going to talk through some very basics of how to conduct this drill. Again, this is a very extensive conversation, but let's just set you off on the right foot. We talked about previously foundational training for employees. Don't do the drill until you've made contact with everybody personally and they have that foundational skill of what their options are. Also, you don't want to make this scary. You want to make it realistic as you can, but not scary. That's not the point. We're giving employees skill sets. We're building them up. We want them to be confident. We want them to feel prepared. We don't want to accomplish this by being scary. There are some times where we want to up the ante and make it a little more realistic, but that's down the road after people have had a lot of training under their belt. So concentrate on making it realistic, not scary. They're not synonymous. You can do a realistic drill without making it scary or freaking people out. Also, you want the assistance of your local police department. This is a very general thing I would present to you. Make sure that you're working with your PD. Here's why. You want the police department on scene so they can monitor, number one, so they know what's happening. Number two, they can monitor the radio traffic. So let's say there's somebody in your building who didn't get the message that there's a practice drill and they see this going on. They're going to call 911 and you're going to have a big problem and you're going to have a major mess on your hands. What started out as a training exercise is now a complete debacle. So you want the police physically there. They'll know what's going on. They'll hear any calls that come in on the radio and they'll be able to deal with it at the time. The other part of that equation is you have to communicate this to everybody that you're conducting a training exercise. That means signs on the perimeter of your physical location. That means making personal contact with everybody involved. Spend the time to do this. Don't rush to do a training exercise and blow it. It's not worth it. you should be working with professionals to do this, whether that's private companies or if your police department will provide you with the amount of time and resources it would take to set up a drill that's individualized to your workspace. We've been talking about training exercises, which are so valuable and what most entities are not doing. They may have a written plan, but as we discussed before, has it been looked at recently? Has it ever been practiced? So training exercises is how you're going to see what works and what doesn't. There is an even better way to do it. It's the gold standard, and this would be an unannounced or surprise active shooter drill or a lockdown drill. Now, this is not as crazy or scary as it sounds. It doesn't mean that we're telling people there's an active shooter on the property and we're going to see what happens. That's not what it is. We do tell people as the drill is commencing, this is a drill. Now, if you want to be even more particular, you could actually tell your employees, we're going to be doing an unannounced drill on Wednesday. So they at least know that on that day there's going to be a drill, but they don't know what time. The purpose of this drill is, this is the only way to really see how people are going to react in an active threat situation. A training drill, an announced training drill, is very, very valuable, and you'll need to do one of those. Maybe you'll need to do many of those before you get to an unannounced drill. You would only do an unannounced surprise drill if you have a very high level of competence on conducting previous active shooter or hard lockdown drills. That means all your employees have gone through 1, 2, or even 3 of these drills. So this unannounced or surprise drill, what this is you're activating the drill and nobody knows it's coming. Again, I will emphasize this, you will never conduct this drill by tricking people or making them think that there's a real threat in their workspace. That's never appropriate. The surprise or unannounced drill, all we're doing is we're conducting the drill, but they didn't know it was coming. That's how you'll really see how people are going to react in an emergency. If you continue to do scheduled drills, and every single drill is the same, you're not gaining anything. Your employees are not learning new skill sets, and you're really not going to know how they're going to react in an emergency. Because if you tell them we're going to do a scheduled drill at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, at 10 a.m. on Tuesday they'll have their door locked already, they'll have the lights off, they'll all have all their stuff put away, and there's very little bit of realism in there. It is important to do those to work up a level of competency, but when you get 1 or 2 or 3 of those drills, start changing variables, start making it more realistic, and do a surprise unannounced drill. Training exercises, specifically active shooter or hard lockdown training exercises. One of the most important things to accomplish during this process is how do you get the word out that there's a bad guy hurting people, and how do you get that word out immediately? Now, of course, everybody needs to take immediate steps to keep themselves safe. After you're in a position of safety, how do you let people know that this is happening? Again, let's think of the 10-story office building. An active threat is happening on floor 6. If that's not an integrated communication system, and more likely than not, it is not. There's different tenants on each floor. Every floor, other than the one that it's happening on, they're not even going to know there's a problem. For hospital buildings, a large hospital campus, multiple buildings, things of that nature, there could be an active threat happening and other buildings are not going to know about it. This is so important. We refer to it as mass notification. What is your mass notification system? In a subsequent video, we'll talk about some of the tools you can use. But for now, we just have to get you thinking about what is your system and how are you going to activate it. This is crucial. Again, after you get safe and you're in a position of safety and security, how do you let other people know? How do we minimize the amount of people that are going to be hurt? If you're a facility manager, a property manager, a building owner, these are the things, these are the processes you should have put in place well ahead of time to get the word out. If you don't have integrated communication, if you don't have a PA system, if you don't have a tool that can work immediately, walkie-talkies, whatever, there's going to be a big delay, and you're going to have people walking through and continuing to come in your building that don't even know there's a violent threat happening. So what are some of the tools we have at our disposal for mass notification? And again, this requires pre-planning. You have to install these tools if you don't have them already, and most businesses don't. A PA system, number one. Schools and hospitals have this. They've had it forever. It requires some integration to make it more user-friendly for an active shooter situation. And we'll talk about those specific entities in other videos. But as a general rule in the workplace, what are some of the tools you have? PA is great, not usually available in a building, especially a building with multiple tenants. But that's something you can work through or work towards. Some phone systems will actually allow the speaker on the phone to be turned into a PA if you dial a code. However, that requires training for your employees. Who knows the code? Do they know how to access the PA? Requires pre-planning, requires training. Walkie-talkies are very effective. Cell phones are certainly a terrific way to communicate. However, in an emergency, when you're dialing a cell phone, you're dialing a number for one person. You're dialing the number and you're letting it ring and you're hoping they answer. Think about letting a ring 3 or 4 times. That's a long time. Walkie-talkies might be much more effective because if you have a walkie-talkie in strategic areas, you get on the walkie-talkie, you make one announcement, and it's heard in multiple locations by multiple people. There are pull stations now similar to fire alarms. There are integrated phone apps that companies and employees could have on their phone. There are some companies that actually have apps that are GPS located where you could press the icon on your desktop phone and it would indicate where you are in the building and it would start the active threat notification process. Other tools are flashing lights, strobe lights, or audible alarms. If you're going to use audible alarms, they need to be different than the fire alarm so people know what the actual crisis is. It's not a fire alarm, it's an active threat. A valuable tool for any active threat or any sort of training for an active threat or an active shooter is this topic that first responders refer to as a command post. Police and fire are very familiar with a command post. It's where the decision makers can go and be in one place, be face-to-face, increase that communication and the resources available to people that are physically there. This is a very valuable tool and it's not utilized in the workplace. Imagine you're coming back to a very large, you're a CEO or a facility manager or a decision maker for a very large building. You're out of the building and you come back to your building and you see that there's been a terrible act of violence in your building. There's a police perimeter around your building. You can't get into your building. Where are you going to go? Where are you going to meet up with other decision makers? Where are you going to meet with the police and fire? We refer to this as a command post and it's very valuable to work with your police department to set this up ahead of time. You're going to be separated by other decision makers, by your other decision makers, your assistants, the other people in your company that are going to be responsible for resolving the situation. Where are you going to hook up with them? Where are you going to meet with them? Ideally, you want it to be in proximity to police and fire. If there's been an active threat in your building, what if they haven't found the bad guy yet? What if this is an ongoing situation? Now you're 10, 15, 20 minutes into a situation. You have a real problem here. Where are people going to gather to make these decisions on how to proceed next? Maybe first responders need blueprints. Maybe they need keys to get through your building, swipe cards, intelligence information. This all should be done at an off-site location nearby where people just know ahead of time to gather. But again, this has to be set up ahead of time. There's just no way to pull this off as you're responding to a situation like this. This requires pre-planning. Another topic for crisis training is the issue of bomb threats. This used to happen in schools a lot, and due to changes they made administratively and decisions they made, this has lessened a lot. But a bomb threat would be tremendously disruptive to any entity, the workplace, schools, hospitals, of course. So you have to ask yourself, if you're running a big building and you're a decision maker and you're in charge, and it's a busy day at the office and your building receives a bomb threat, can you imagine your whole building shutting down for the day? Have you thought through that? It doesn't necessarily need to happen like that, but again, you need pre-planning. There is a very organized and systematic way to handle a bomb threat, the details of which would far exceed this short video, but we do want to give you some things to think about. As part of pre-planning, you should have a building map that shows all the offices and spaces in your building, and there should also be people responsible for checking those buildings, for checking those spaces. If you didn't know, police and fire are not going to come through your building and check every space. Number one, they don't know what belongs there and what doesn't belong there. So it's not valuable, it's not efficient. The only person that's going to be able to look at a workspace at an office and say what belongs there and what doesn't is the person who works there. So those people should be clearing their individual workspaces and reporting that up through the chain of command in an orderly, systematic fashion. Now, this business of evacuating, if you have a credible threat, obviously you've seen something that indicates there's a bomb or an explosive device, certainly you're going to evacuate. But the issue of a full-blown evacuation has been disfavored as a general rule. Certainly, if that's what's decided is the best and safest thing to do, you're going to evacuate. But there are many times where evacuating through a building may not be the safest. And we're going to talk about that and reasons why that's not the safest course of action in the next video. If you or your employees have an indication that there's a dangerous explosive or something that could blow up and harm everybody in the office, of course, getting away from it and evacuating is the best course of action. There are times, though, where you have a very large facility and evacuating may not be the best course of conduct, especially if nobody has actually seen an explosive device. So let's say you get a phoned-in bomb threat or any sort of a threat that's come to your attention. You don't know where it is. So you have this business of doing a full-scale evacuation. Here are some things to think about. Maybe you're actually safer where you already are. Are you in a cinder block wall? Are you in a school building type setting where cinder block walls, solid doors? You have no idea where the explosive device is anyway. It could be on the other side of the building. Maybe you're better off just staying put as long as you check your immediate area and the people near you have checked their areas and you know immediately adjacent to you is nothing is out of the ordinary. Maybe you're better off there. Also, something else to consider, if you're leading people out of a building or instructing them to come out of a building, have you cleared the areas in which you're evacuating? If there are explosive devices, maybe that's where they are, is areas where people are going to be leaving or exiting the building or even in parking lots. So if you haven't cleared those areas, you may want to consider staying put. You know that your area is cleared because you checked it. You checked with your other adjacent people in other offices and they've checked their area. So that's something to consider. You may be better off staying put. As we mentioned in the previous video, there is a systematic and orderly way you can handle a bomb threat. And again, this is assuming that you don't see any obvious signs of an explosive device and that you have decided it's better to stay in your safe area than to funnel out of an area in which you don't know is safe. So what are some of the systematic and orderly ways that you can handle this situation? Number one, have a building map, a map that shows each individual space. Again, this is all pre-planning. This is not happening at the time. It's going to be too late at that time. Have a map, have people responsible for those certain areas of the building. If you work in your office, you will be responsible for that area. If there are more general areas, larger areas, a gymnasium, a lunchroom, there should be supervisor administrators that are responsible for going to check that area. You create a very organized and systematic communication in which all those people check their areas, report that back up through the chain of command. It's noted and documented that certain areas have been checked, and you realize what areas have been checked and what haven't been, and get those checked. Police and fire do not check your building. They don't know what belongs there and what doesn't. They're not going to walk through that building. The decision to evacuate or not to evacuate is yours. There is the opportunity to bring a bomb-sniffing dog. Very low likelihood. There's very few bomb-sniffing dogs, and it would definitely shut your building down for the day. You'd need multiple dogs to handle a big building. So the point is, check your area, get that orderly, systematic communication, and be able to report back very quickly that you've checked your area and everybody's checked their area, and you can report that nobody has found an explosive device. And at that point, you'll have a much better knowledge base on what to figure out what to do next. We've talked about this term lockdown. And I also mentioned that there's hard lockdowns and soft lockdowns. Hard lockdowns are an active threat in your midst. You have to take immediate action to stay safe and to survive. What is a soft lockdown? A soft lockdown is a very valuable tool that I highly recommend you you practice and become familiar with. The larger your space, the more people in your space, the more important a soft lockdown is. It can be used both when a threat is outside the facility and during a crisis situation inside the facility. It wouldn't be used for an active shooter inside your facility, but it could be used for other crisis situations inside your facility. Okay, so outside and inside, soft lockdown. When would we want to use this in an outside situation? What if the police were chasing an armed robber or somebody who committed a firearm, shot somebody, and they're chasing them through your neighborhood or chasing them right through your parking lot or through your corporate campus? Wouldn't you want to know that? Hopefully the police will call you. They may not be able to, but hopefully the word will come through that there's a dangerous person running through your campus. You have to go into a soft lockdown, which means you secure your perimeter, you let employees know, don't leave. You be very careful about who you let in. You may want to actually shut the building down. Now, if an employee can come in with their own prox card, that's fine, but you should probably staff every door to make sure the bad guy isn't coming in. Very valuable tool. Shut that building down. Now, if people want to leave, they're adults. You can't keep them from leaving, but you need to be able to communicate to them that a bad guy is in their midst. So that's when you would use a soft lockdown for a threat in the outside community. In the next video, we'll talk about some great opportunities to use a soft lockdown within your building. When is it a good opportunity to use a soft lockdown for a crisis situation in your building? We discussed previously that a soft lockdown is a great tool to use when there's a threat outside your building. It lets everybody know to stay inside and stay safe. What would happen inside your building that would cause you to go into a soft lockdown situation? A couple things come to mind. What if you had a medical emergency? An employee dropped in the hallway, or somebody's been hurt in a workplace accident and it's a gruesome scene. You don't want employees coming into the room or into the hallway. You want to keep them where they are, and also to let first responders get quickly into your building. Might be a good or a good opportunity to do what's called a soft lockdown. It means it's a big timeout is what it is. It keeps everybody in place. Wherever you are, just stay there till you get further instruction. Great thing to use in a medical emergency. When could this be used in more of a crime type situation? Imagine this, you're in a large facility or a large building, and a person comes out of a bathroom or comes out of an office space and claims and alleges that they were assaulted, and they don't know who did it. You've just had a serious violent crime happen in your building. You need to get a handle on that and figure out, there may be evidence collection issues, figure out who did it, put everybody on a soft lockdown. Just make sure everybody stops moving. You'll be able to identify your offender. There will not be so much confusion when the police show up. And for evidence recovery purposes, that's a great tool. Nobody is going into the area that the crime occurred in. So there are many opportunities to use a soft lockdown in a large commercial space. This topic of crisis training, pretty new to our workplace. And fortunately, because you're watching this, you or your employer have decided this is a priority, and we want to do some pre-planning and create a safer space in our workplace. This may involve writing a written plan and conducting training. What I want to talk about now is who is the appropriate person or the appropriate job description to do that. If you start with the wrong person or wrong job description, you may sink yourself before you even get started, and we want to share some tips with you that we've learned from personal experience. It is very important for somebody to be doing this, to be in a very high-level administrative or supervisory position, and here's why. Many employees are going to look at this as an inconvenience. If you're going to ask them to come to training or take place in an actual physical training, even if the training only takes 10 or 15 minutes, there's meetings leading up to it and the actual drill, and people are going to be inconvenienced, and they may not take it seriously. If you have I don't want to say lower level employee, but if you have an employee with who's not a supervisor, it's going to be very easy for other employees to basically blow them off or just not participate in the hard work that they're doing. Similarly, if you are an administrator and you're not taking it seriously, that will have a trickle-down effect. In other words, we've participated in drills in which the big bosses are too busy to participate in the drill, and they're just in their offices continuing to do business while all the other employees are moving through the facility or doing what they have to do. Employees see that, and that sends a message that this training is not important. And if the boss doesn't have to do it, why do I have to do it? So it's very important when you're conducting this process to start with a high-level employee to do this training. That way everybody's going to be on board, or at least they're going to do what they're told. And make sure that the person who's heading this training takes it seriously and participates in every aspect of this training. Because if they don't, if they show any signs that they're too busy to participate, I guarantee you that will trickle down and your training is going to disintegrate very quickly. Let's talk a little bit about a termination or discipline of a hostile employee in the workplace. Now this will be specific depending on the situation in the building, but let's talk about some general tips to think about at least. Your team should have a systematic and pre-planned way to deal with this. Dealing with an employee or disciplining them or terminating them, this should not be a meeting that just pops up or is just fit in between other meetings. This should be pre-planned with certain people in the room, conducted at a certain part of the building, at a certain day, at a certain time, with the certain resources available. Let's talk about some things that are not appropriate. Calling your largest employees to be present, the big guys, the strong guys, to be present in case something goes bad. Not appropriate, wildly inappropriate actually. It's not their job description to fight with a dangerous person or a hostile person, and they don't have the skills for that. Not fair to them. Whether you tell them that's why they're in the meeting or not, that's not the way to go. Also, if you decide that you want to use the police department, we've seen situations where the police will certainly come by to the best of their ability, but you'll have a police officer sitting outside in the parking lot in the squad car. That's not going to be of any use if the bad guy pulls out a knife or a gun in the office. If you're going to go that far and you want the police there, you may have to contract with them or ask them to send over a plainclothes officer and actually have them physically present, probably right outside the door, or at least in an area where they can take immediate action if things go bad. So again, lots to say in this issue, but for purposes of this video, we just want to share those couple of very general points with you. Take this seriously, spend the time and effort it takes to plan this appropriately, and it'll pay off for you. The topic of crisis training in the workplace also has to include domestic violence. If a bad guy commits a criminal act against their partner, husband, wife, whoever, and that partner moves out, the bad guy may not know where they moved to or where they're temporarily living, but they sure know where they work. So domestic violence will eventually affect the workplace. So what are some of the things we have to be proactive about or talk about? We should encourage our employees to share this information with HR or with certain administrators in the workplace. No other employees need to know the details, but if there is an offender, if there is somebody we should be on the lookout for, that employee should be sharing that information with the key people in the organization, and everybody in the company can be another set of eyes and ears. So there is stories of, we know of one particular situation where a woman reported that the offender was driving a red Mustang. That's just for an example, whatever the car was. It was relayed through to building security and to all the employees in an email. It didn't identify the employee in question. It didn't give any details. It simply said, if you see this car on our building property or around our property, please alert security. They shouldn't be there. Sure enough, an employee who didn't know anything about the particulars of this domestic situation saw the car out in the parking lot, contacted security. Security called 911. Cops showed up, interacted with the guy, and he had a gun in his car, and arrested him. So this was a great outcome, simply because that employee shared some basic information with the company, and that led to everybody in the company being another set of eyes and ears, keeping themselves safe. But this is a topic that we need to encourage people and give them confidence to share a little bit with us, because this threat is going to show up at the workplace. Let's talk about your fellow employees that may make inappropriate comments or threatening comments in the workplace. We know now that this is wildly out of line. Many years ago, of course, we all learned you can never joke about a bomb in an airport, right? You would never do that now. You just know your entire day would end right then and there. Similarly, this mindset has to now be present in the workplace. Making inappropriate threats, or whether in person or on social media, against your coworkers or supervisors, wildly inappropriate. Now, there's always still a reluctance to report somebody for this, because you don't want to get them in trouble, or maybe you don't want to get them in trouble. But we have to convince our employees that there are many reasons why that has to be done, and why ultimately it's the best course of conduct for the offender as well. Three things come to mind. Number one, if an employee hears an inappropriate comment in person and discounts it and simply says, well, you know, that's Joe, Joe's an idiot, those are the type of things that Joe says, but he's not serious. Number one, they've made an assessment of that comment without any training on their part, whether that is an actual threat or whether that it's just bluster or anger. So do they have the skills to make a mental health evaluation? No. Number two, they've kept it to themselves, meaning that they haven't shared it with other employees, and now no other employees know this comment was made, and that's not fair to them and their ability to create a safe environment for themselves. And number three, frequently in a workplace shooting or any active threat situation, the offender will frequently take their life. So if an employee does report that offender, and that offender is investigated and that threat is assessed, that person may get mental health assistance that'll keep them alive, and that'll keep many other employees alive. So it is a win-win if you look at it that way. Thank you for choosing us to help you with your crisis training. We hope that as a result of your efforts and your work with us, that you feel confident and that you feel prepared to deal with any active threat in your workplace.